All right, so in this video, I wanted to look at grouping and aggregation in a Pandas data frame. And this is something that I do all of the time. So let's just import Pandas and let's read in that sales forecasting data. So just to kind of remind everyone, so let's look at the head. Let's look at 3 rows this time. All right, so this is what we have. So we have, a data set apparently of customer orders. We have information on when they ordered things, the mode that they used to ship, and so forth. And maybe we're interested in asking things like, well, how many customers, how many orders in this data use second class versus standard class shipment? What is the average sales by category, and so forth. So a lot of different questions that we can kind of get at that are dependent on us having the ability to kind of say, okay, well, within a particular partition of this data, what is going on, or grouping by a particular partition. All right, so just a few things to kind of remind you of. So remember that I've said multiple times that, Pandas is really, it's built on top of NumPy. So those two things are quite, they're very interlinked. Most of your Pandas data is just represented internally as a NumPy array. So if I were to grab a column like, say, the sales, so I could grab sales, that returns to me a series, okay? But I can actually call .values on that and immediately get that as a NumPy array. So this is just showing you how closely linked those things are. All right, and if I do data sales and then do a dot and hit tab, we have access to a lot of methods. A lot of these are numerical methods that are, inherited from the fact that these things are just NumPy arrays. So if I wanted to get the mean sales value, I could just call a dot mean. If I want to get the standard deviation in sales values, I could do the standard deviation. I'm going to show you a few more that I tend to use a lot. Okay, if I wanted to get the total, we could do a sum. We could get the minimum sales value using the min. Right, we can get the maximum, getting the max. We can get the most likely value. Let's move to another column to do that. So let's maybe go to our category here. So let's say our data category. If we want to get the most likely, or the mode, right? We can see the mode is furniture. Notice that this is returning to me actually a series. All right. Let me do one more value. I should have done this one before. We can do the median. All right. We can get the mode. We can get the unique values in a particular column. So if I call data category and then I say a dot unique, these are the unique categories. So apparently we only have furniture. Let's go to another column with that. Let's go to our subcategory. So this must be all furniture sales. So let's get the mode for our subcategory. So that's furnishings. And then what are the unique values? Well, it's bookcases, chairs, tables, or furnishings. And then we can also get the count. Right? So what's the count? So this is just the number of rows. So we've got 2,121 values, and we know that's the number of rows that we have in our data frame. Now, of course, this could differ if you have missing values, right? So if you have missing values in a column, it could be that the count is different from the number of rows. All right, so if you recall, right, we never want to do looping, right? So you might think, well, gosh, if I want to figure out the mean sales by a particular category, what I need to do is I need to loop through my data frame, maybe use my filtering mechanism, to say only give me back the rows where subcategory is equal to bookcases, and then look at the sales column and compute the mean across just that subset of data. but we actually have a mechanism in Pandas that we can do that much easier. All right. And I'm going to show you a few variations of this. So this is one of those things where, like we were talking about accessors, right? You've got .loc, you've got iloc, you can grab columns just like this. There's a couple of different ways. If it's, you can by all means, learn all the ways and the intricacies of each and use them. I am going to show you a method that I prefer, and personally, I would encourage you just to use that method once we get to it. But first, let's just say that we want to, again, maybe get the mean sales by subcategory. All right. So what we can do, if we have a data frame, we can do a dot group by, all one word. All right. And we can pass in a single column or a list of columns. So I'm just going to say I want to group by. These are the things I want to partition my data by. I want to group by subcategory. And in this case, if we wanted to let's just look up, it's our sales column. What if we want to figure out the mean sales? You could do this. You can say, well, for each one of those, just grab the sales column and then compute the mean. All right, so that runs. That gives me back, for each one of it gives me back actually a Pandas series. So this is a Pandas series object. It's named sales, so it's named whatever the column we're aggregating on. It's giving me back floats, and it's showing that, hey, bookcases, the average, the mean sales is 503, chairs is 532, furnishings 95, and tables. So tables has the highest mean sales. All right. I don't love this way for a few reasons, right? So first off, it's returning the series, so I really don't know what that number means. I know it sales something, but is it the mean? Is it the max? Is it the median? Is it the standard deviation? I have no clue. So even though we're performing the aggregation, and you might say, well, gosh, we know that from here, still it's not obvious in the object that's returned. Also, watch what happens. So if I were to instead pass subcategory as a string, if I pass it as a list, this runs. All right, and they apparently in these later versions have corrected this, because this used to, I believe, result in slightly different behavior. So it's still returning the sales. We don't know what this number means. All right, but what if we wanted to return, maybe the mean for 2 columns? So let's look up and grab another column. So maybe the profit, right? So sales and profit. Well, we can actually provide, or a list of these things. Whoops, feel like I've lost my cursor. There we go. Felt like I had to break out of something there. Let's see, can I get my cursor here? Interesting. So it seems it has moved me. Let me just do a restart and clear all outputs. When things don't behave correctly, let's see if we can clean them up. All right, so let me go back down. Very good. All right, so I can say, well, maybe give me the sales and the profit here. All right. Now it doesn't return a series, right? It can't, right? It makes sense because we're saying to do, we're going to do aggregations on 2 columns. It's returning a data frame. So it's saying, well, for bookcases, this is going to be your mean sales, and we actually have negative profit. We're losing money there. Maybe there's some discounts or whatnot. But in this case, it returns a data frame, and then notice it gives me the column names here. So it says sales and profit, but actually that's the mean sales and the mean profit. So, I would like it to be a little bit more explicit. So again, just showing you, this is a very, when I read a lot of code online, I see people doing aggregations using, this is kind of a shorthand to me. It works, but you got to be really careful. You need to know what's coming back. And then if personally, if I were using this, I would say, well, something like I would store that as an intermediate data frame, something like temp. And then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to rename things, right? Because I want it to be specific, right? I need to know, well, that's going to be, the first column is going to be mean sales. And then this is going to be mean profit, right? So now when I look at temp, right, that's at least correct. So that's kind of a personal thing. Again, I'm all about, even if it's a few additional keystrokes, let's make things easy for future you. All right. So I'm going to show you the method now that I would encourage you to adopt. I think it's very flexible. It always returns a consistent type, be it, it's always going to return a data frame. And it allows you to do column naming as you go. Right. The syntax looks a little bit odd, admittedly, but again, if you're going to learn a way, I would learn this way and just use it consistently. All right, so let's try to do the same thing as we've got right here. All right, so it's going to start off exactly the same. So we've got data.groupby, and I would just say always just, you can give it multiple things to group by. You can say, oh, I want to group by, subcategory in a particular country. So you can always use a list right here and just add multiple things, and it's going to group on each combination of those items or of those column values that are present in the data. So you can do a dot group by, but instead of using this kind of shorthand, let's just pick some columns at the end. You can use dot ag, open close parentheses, right? And what you can do, and so right now in my data or in my notebook, I don't have an object called mean sales. That does not run, right? We don't have a variable called mean sales. But when you're specifying this, what you'll do is something like this. So let me type, and then I will explain. Oops. And then we're going to do profit. So mean profit equals profit. All right, so up to this point, everything looked the same, right? So we do group by, we can provide a list of things that we want to group by, and again, it's going to look at all combinations. I'll show you an example of that shortly. And then .ag. And what you can do is you can provide multiple statements on different rows, or at least comma separated. I would encourage you to do it on multiple rows. But what this will do right here, we saw we don't have mean sales, and it looks like this might give us a problem. But what this is telling Pandas is, hey, I want you to create a new column in the data frame that's returned called mean sales, and that needs to be equal to the values in the sales column with the mean numerical method applied. And then this one's going to create a column called mean profit, taking the values in the profit column, and those do have to be columns in your data frame, right? So I do have a sales and a profit column, and then apply that mean to it, right? So that dot mean. And again, these methods, where am I getting them? You can test the methods by just getting a column and then calling that method. All right. So now when I run this, it's going to return a data frame where it's done all of that naming for me. So it looks equivalent to this code right here where I did that kind of shorthand aggregation, and then I rename the columns. So it does that all in one go. So I really like that. I think that's, again, this piece right here takes a little bit to get used to, because you kind of need to get a little bit of familiarity with, well, does Pandas have a median? Does it have a mean? What are the functions available to me? But I think it's pretty easy to get the hang of. And once you again, you're going to be doing certain things probably over and over again. So you'll get used to that. So if we want to put like another one with like the median profit, right, we could do that really easy now. There we go. Very nice. Now, I did want to show you another example of like what happens when you've got more than one group by column, because this is kind of an interesting case. So in this case, we got subcategory. Let's look up at our data, and let's say, what if we want to do it by region and subcategory? So, what's the profit? Is it varying? Is our profitability, our sales, varying by subcategory and region? So I can put that in there. I can say, well, region, and it works. you can say, okay, when the region is central and you're doing bookcases, you're losing a lot on pretty much everything. Right. So in the central region, your median profit, your mean profits here, you have a lot more negatives, versus if you look in the West, right? So, your median profits are all positive and you do have a negative mean profit here. All right. So this looks like it's all working, right? Everything seems to be good. What's odd about this, let me save this as a temporary object. So the interesting thing, if I look at the columns, right, we get mean sales, mean profit, median profit. Let me just print the object so we can see it. All right. But if you look at the index now, so this is a data frame, and we get this weird index. It's a multi-index, right? So you see, oh, we've got central bookcases is central bookcases. That's one of our index values. This is weird, right? Because if I wanted to use like a .loc to grab that, well, now I've got to provide it a tuple because it's kind of this nested index, right? So I can get that series back. And where's that at? So this is getting that row right here, right? So you can do some interesting stuff with these multi-index. I do not use them though. Again, you're having to pass these tuples, but now you might be saying, well, gosh, we've done this. Well, what if I wanted to figure out, get the stuff for bookcases? How can I do that? Well, what you need to do is you need to reset the index of that object and get it where you can access these things in the columns, or at least that's how I like to do it. I don't like to work with those multi-index. Well, how do you do that? Well, a data frame method or a data frame object has a method called reset index. When you do that right now, this is our index, region, and subcategory. It's all those combinations in a multi-index fashion. When I call reset index, it's going to pop them back in as columns in the data, and we get a new consecutive integer based index. All right. Now, so this is kind of what I like to do, right? So if I'm doing some aggregation or grouping where I've got two things right there, I'm going to usually do the group by expression, and then I'm going to reset the index. All right. Now, one last thing that I'm going to kind of show here is, so let's put all of this together. So what if we're trying to say, get, some type of simple comparison, right? So right now we're doing this aggregation by region and subcategory. We get the mean sales, mean profit, the median profit, and then we do a reset index and we get something that looks like this. Well, what you might want to do is say, okay, well, can I look across for one of these values, maybe the median profit, let's say, can I look at how that changes by region and subcategory to identify patterns in a more easier format? And by more easier format, I immediately think of people that are working with Excel or have worked with Excel before. The one thing that they love to do and show off their Excel skills is pivot tables or are pivot tables. We can do that in Pandas as well. So if I've got this data frame here, and you can think of this, and this is oftentimes, again, part of one of these group by pipelines. So we've grouped on region and subcategory. I reset the index, and now you can either use, oops, got up top. So there's, I think, two methods. Let me do a temp dot. So you've got a pivot and a pivot table. I don't know if the arguments are going to be pretty much the same. I tend to use pivot. All right. The arguments, you need to specify what you want to be in the index, what you want to be in the columns, and what you want to be for values. So in this case, let's say we want to go by region and subcategory. We want to do median profit. So let me put in the index, let's just say that's going to be our region values. It needs to map to something that's in the data. So I'm calling this on temp, right? So temp, again, is a data frame that has all of this information. So these need index and columns need to specify to one of those columns in the object. So if I do a temp.pivot, I'll say the index will be the region. Let's put subcategory in the columns. And the values that we want to show are median profit. Values. So it's saying, hey, I got an unexpected argument value. And if I look at the documentation, it should be values. Great. There we go. All right. And we can see some of those things I was talking about. So from, the median profit, as we can see, so the central, at the 50th percentile in the median, they're always, their profitability is negative. Something's going wrong in that region, right? And in general, tables tend to be a little bit of a problem. So across, if we look in the central, east, and south regions, looking at the median profit, it's pretty significant, negative numbers. I mean, not massive, but I certainly don't want to be losing $100 on every table in the east region. So we can summarize this really, really quickly. All right, so that is going to conclude this video on grouping and aggregation.